I've really been living a double life for so many years. If you ask any of the kids that I grew up with, nobody had an idea. They just knew that I was adopted and that was it. They didn't know that I had this double life. I struggled quite a bit.
Taj Rowland's double life began when he was a little boy. His name was Chelamuthu. He lived in a dusty, poor village in sweltering southern India, and his belly constantly howled for food.
When I was taken, it was closer to dusk, late afternoon, and I was in a crowded bus stop, millions of people and bodies hurling around, a very crowded marketplace. As a young boy from a poor family, the stomach is always hungry. Hunger, it makes a person do things that they normally wouldn't do. So what I remember is being coaxed to go with some people. They gave all the fantasies of food and snacks and treats, and I was coerced to get onto a bus.
And the bus just kept going as darkness descended.
And as I'm looking out the windows, real fear is creeping in, knowing that I'm getting further and further away from family and all the things that I loved and held close to my heart.
The bus finally stopped in a pitch-black village where the little boy was forced into a jeep. Later, he was dumped at the gate of an orphanage. He has no idea how long he was kept there.
If you were asking a 6-7-year-old boy, it was probably forever. I wasn't looking at time that way. I think I was looking at trying to escape and go back to what I was. The orphanage was quite small when I look at it now, but when I was there, it seemed big. And it was surrounded by walls. There was a gate. It was almost like a makeshift prison to me as a young boy. That doesn't take away from the people there. They were genuinely good people. They fed us, they bathed us, and I think attempted to do entertainment. And then I know that I was taken to the hospital a few times to just get checked up, and then headed to America.
On the other side of the world, a Mormon couple, unable to have children of their own, had applied to adopt an orphan from India. They had chosen the name Taj to preserve his heritage.
That pathway from the bus station to Utah, it's like a nightmare that you can't awake from. You want to escape, and your brain says, this can't be possibly happening to me. When I landed into Salt Lake City, my adopted parents were there. All I wanted to do was stay close to the orphanage owner because that was most familiar to me. Suddenly I'm landing in a country where everybody is white, language is completely different. It was freezing cold. I landed into Salt Lake City in the middle of December. Landed in flip-flops and shorts. There's nothing about it that you can't forget. But the biggest is that choking fear in my throat that I just can't escape.
Fred and Linda Rowland hugged and kissed the sobbing and screaming child who arrived in 1979 at Salt Lake City's airport. They believed they had rescued a motherless and fatherless boy, and they whisked him away to their suburban home and immersed him in all things Mormon and American.
You could tell that I was in a save yourself mentality. I used to steal oranges and fruit and hide them under my pillow, thinking tomorrow this might end. I would do things that's typical of a young child from India who didn't have anything. And I know that my parents used to chuckle. They look, you have plenty of this, and they'd put it back. But my mother, she had some forethought, and she thought when this young man gets older, it might be interesting for him to listen to himself speaking a different language. She would take out the cassette player. She'd press both the play and the record at the same time, and she would stick a microphone into my face. I would start speaking in Tamil. I just started to share everything that came to my heart. She did this repeatedly for probably a few months, and so she had recordings.
Decades later, those recordings would lead Taj Rowland to his family in India, who had never forgotten him. But for now, he was adrift in the roiling sea of his new life.
It must have taken me 3 years to start understanding English. I remember my father was a wrestling coach, and since I couldn't speak English, he would take me and put me into wrestling matches saying, hey, let him at least participate. I had won a ribbon. I came home all excited and I showed to my parents, and in broken English, I said, I want to go show this to my mom. And this was the clue. My parents immediately said, wait a minute here. We thought we were getting an orphan. And that's where the whole process of trying to connect with the orphanage and contact the people all came about.
That process turned out to be an exercise in futility. His adoptive parents wrote to the orphanage. They wrote to the American embassy. They wrote to random people in India referred by a relative who lived in Utah.
My parents started to reach out to everybody they knew. They found an Indian here, probably the only Indian in Utah in the early 80s. And they said, hey, we have this child, is there any way you can help him? They referred to somebody that they knew in India. And so my parents wrote a letter to this person out in India. Back in those days, it was snail mail, right? You send a piece of paper out and you wait for 45 days, then it comes back. My parents received a response. To summarize, they said, lady, there's 1 billion people here. And that's really the extent of that.
More years went by. As a young man, Taj Rowland went to London as a Mormon missionary. In the city's East End, he was surrounded by people who looked like him. Sights and smells resurrected old memories. Women wearing saris, Indian spices being cooked.
As I would be walking through the streets and I would smell these familiar smells, it was like, wait a second, I know what that is. And then, of course, there are so many Indians, and you can just look in the mirror and say, wait a minute, there's something here. Suddenly, these small memories of a child were bombarding me. Over the period of 2 years that I was in London, I suddenly had this craving to go back. And I decided, let me remember everything I can. I painfully took all these thoughts and put it on a paper, drew a map of where I came from. And in that map, it had a river, a bus stop, a park, all those familiar things that a 6, 7, 8-year-old boy would have.
After completing his 2-year mission in London, Taj returned to Utah. He became friends with the owner of a new Indian restaurant. He eventually began dating the owner's sister. Her name was Priya, and she was from Tamil Nadu. She later became his wife.
I took Priya for the first time to meet my parents.
His proud adoptive mother pulled out family scrapbooks and photos. There was Taj as a little boy, and the audio tape of him speaking Tamil.
Priya, she is flipping through this scrapbook, and she sees this letter. And this is the letter that my mother had wrote to this person in India back in the 80s and said, can you help us out? Well, she's reading this letter, and she turns it over and goes, wow, this handwriting looks so familiar to me. She flips the letter over. The letter was from her father.
This strange coincidence was the beginning of a serendipitous chain that changed Taj's life forever, though he sees it as divine intervention.
And then she brings out this audio cassette tape. And as this cassette tape is playing, my wife Priya now is able to listen to this cassette tape. Suddenly the voice of this young, scared 7, 8-year-old boy is pouring his heart out, talking about his family. And this always tears me up, but talking about how scared he was about his mother and his cousins. And then we heard, I want to go back, let me go back. It was almost like begging. And you can hear my mother say, oh, good boy, because she had no clue what I was saying. But by the time we finished listening to that cassette tape, I knew what my brother's name was, what my mother's name was, my father's name. And so this girl that I end up marrying, she was really the key to helping me find my past.
After their wedding, Taj and Priya traveled to India for the marriage ceremony of her brother. Taj carried the map he'd drawn from vague memories of his village. He eventually found that village and his original family.
We finally got into this rickshaw. We're driving through these village roads, and my friend who was sitting next to me, we are crawling through palm trees, and we see a mud hut, a couple of naked children, and a young woman.
That woman turned out to be his sister-in-law, and the children were his nieces and nephews. Taj watched as the woman ran towards a river.
Apparently, my mother was taking a bath in the river. And after a few minutes, suddenly you see this woman, half naked, hair soaking wet, throwing her sari blouse on top, just running up this hill.
So many children had gone missing in these villages during the time Chelamutu vanished. The grown Taj wanted to make sure this was really his family.
A few things on my body that only my family would know is I was a rowdy kid, didn't listen to my mother, don't run by the bus stop, don't eat out of garbage cans, all those things I did. In order to teach me, she took hot coals and put them on my feet and burnt my feet so that I would stay closer to home. I still have those big, long scars on my feet. I have scars on my fingers. In India, the way that they grind wheat is they take a big chunk of rock, they take a piece of wood and they pound the wheat to break it up. I must have been 6, 7 years old and my fingers weren't fast enough. And this big piece of wood came down and smashed my fingers. Being poor and uneducated, they didn't take me to a hospital. They just take it and stick it into a fire to cauterize the burns. So I've got 2 fingers on my right hand that are disfigured. Suddenly my mother is already talking about these scars on my fingers and my feet. There's no proof, but the heart immediately knows.
As word spread of Taj's journey to find his Indian family, he was approached by a Utah writer named Cameron Wright, who convinced him to tell his story.
I just never felt comfortable. It's my life. I don't want people to know. It's only 7, 8 years ago that he came to me and said, Taj, it might be helpful for others. That's when I realized it might be good for me as well, because it was therapy for me. He would ask questions, I would answer.
Those conversations became a book titled The Orphan Keeper, published in 2016.
And it's almost like I was cursing God. Why did this happen to me? I felt that going through this process of telling my story, it was very therapeutic. Excuse me, sharing the story really isn't for other people. It was for me. I've learned a lot about forgiveness. Somebody out there, they might be struggling or having the self-doubts. They may be able to use my experiences to help them create a better appreciation for life and realize that life is just a set of circumstances that change in a minute. And you may think that you're going through a very tough portion of your life, but realize that it'll change tomorrow.
Taj has recently completed a 10-part podcast with British journalist and BBC reporter Emma Jane Kirby.
Anybody listening to Taj is completely caught up in his story. You can't believe it. It's such a heartbreaking story of a stolen childhood. But it's a very healing story. In our fractured times, we all need that. Taj is a role model of resilience. I mean, why isn't the guy in jail or in a mental asylum somewhere?
Taj Rowland is now in his mid-50s. He has a successful import-export business. He and his wife have 2 daughters. They split their time between India and Utah.
Now it's like changing clothes for me. I travel to India often. I spend a great deal of time out there. I have 2 huge villages with thousands of relations. And when I land there, I feel right at home. I could live there without a problem. When I get on a plane, I land into America. I change clothes. I put on my dress shirts and I feel right at home. I have family that love me. I have friends and I feel very comfortable regardless of which country I'm in. I've been blessed. I'm lucky, actually.
This is Inside Edition Digital.